My name is Rachel Whitaker, and the day my sister accused me of lying about cancer in our family group chat was the day my world turned upside down. What should have been a moment for love and support became the cruelest betrayal I never saw coming. And as the truth unfolded, none of us would ever look at each other the same again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started quietly, the kind of quiet that hides a storm just behind the horizon. I had been feeling sick for months, fatigue that clung to me like a heavy coat, bruises that formed without explanation, nights where I'd wake drenched in sweat and trembling. I thought maybe it was stress, maybe I was just overworked, but when the doctor suggested running more tests, I knew it was something deeper. My gut whispered what my mind was too afraid to say. This wasn't ordinary. Still, I held on to the hope that was nothing serious. That hope didn't last long. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the middle daughter in a family that prided itself on toughness. My parents raised us with the kind of hard edges born from blue-collar lives and Midwestern grit. My older sister, Stephanie, was the golden child, organized, sharp-tongued, the kind of person who could command a room without lifting her voice. My younger brother, Tyler, was the quiet one, happiest working with his hands, building engines, and tinkering with motorcycles. And then there was me, Rachel, the middle child who always felt like she had to prove herself in between Stephanie's perfection and Tyler's easygoing charm. When I first confided in my family that the doctors were running tests to check for possible lymphoma, I expected shock. Maybe concern, maybe even a touch of denial. What I didn't expect was the subtle tightening of Stephanie's jaw, the raised eyebrow that communicated doubt louder than any words. My mother immediately rushed to offer comfort. My father grunted something about staying strong. Tyler texted me later to check in quietly. But Stephanie? She stayed silent. And silence from her always carried meaning. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. We weren't always close, but she was still my sister. She wouldn't think I'd make something like this up. Would she? The first test results came back inconclusive, but the doctors insisted on further examinations. Words like abnormal cells and bone marrow biopsy hovered over me like storm clouds, and I felt myself getting smaller under their weight. The fatigue grew worse. There were days I could barely get out of bed, and still, I forced myself to show up to work at the community center where I helped coordinate youth programs. It was more than just a job. It was a lifeline, something that reminded me I was still useful, still part of something bigger than the fear consuming me. Then came the night everything snapped. Our family had a group chat on WhatsApp where we shared updates, photos, and the occasional political argument. It was our digital kitchen table. I typed a short message to let them know I had another appointment scheduled, this time with an oncologist who specialized in blood cancers. My hands trembled as I hit send, not because of what I wrote, but because of the heaviness behind the words. A few minutes passed before my phone buzzed. Stephanie had replied. She's lying. She just wants attention. Nobody suddenly thinks they have cancer. I stared at the screen, the words stabbing sharper than any needle. My breath caught, heat rising to my cheeks as if the phone itself had burned me. My mother quickly typed, "Stephanie, that's not fair." But the damage was already done. My father went silent, as he always did when conflict sparked. Tyler sent me a private message, "Ignore her. I believe you." But I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't unsee the venom in her words. It wasn't just disbelief, it was an accusation. It was her telling the whole family that my pain, my fear, my exhaustion was nothing more than a performance. I dropped the phone on my bed and buried my face in my hands. How could my own sister think I'd invent something like this? Was our relationship so fractured that she truly believed me capable of fabricating cancer for sympathy? Sleep didn't come that night. I kept replaying her words, imagining her smirk as she typed them, imagining the doubt spreading like poison through my family. What if my parents believed her? What if they thought I was exaggerating? I had already been questioning myself for weeks. Maybe I was weak. Maybe I wasn't really sick. Maybe I was just failing at holding life together. Stephanie's accusation poured gasoline on every doubt I carried. The next morning, I forced myself into clothes and drove to the hospital for my biopsy. The sterile white halls felt colder than usual, the fluorescent lights buzzing louder. I signed the consent forms with shaking hands. Lying on that table as the doctor extracted a sample from my bone marrow, I thought about Stephanie's message. Every pull of the needle seemed to echo her words, liar, liar, liar. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms, promising myself I would prove her wrong, not just for me, but because truth deserved to stand against cruelty. When I walked out of the hospital later that day, gauze taped to my back, I pulled out my phone again. More messages had filled the group chat. My mother urging patience, Tyler trying to keep the peace, my father staying aloof. Stephanie hadn't said another word. She didn't need to. Her accusation lingered like a shadow, one that would follow me until the results arrived. And when those results finally came, the truth would explode in a way none of us could ignore. The thing about family is that they see you in ways no one else does. They see the cracks you try to hide, the insecurities you thought you buried. And sometimes they're the ones who press hardest against those weak spots. My sister's accusation wasn't born out of nowhere. It was planted in a field that had been tilled for years with rivalry, resentment, and the unspoken hierarchies of our family dynamic. Stephanie had always been the responsible one. She graduated from Ohio State with honors, got a job in corporate finance, and bought a tidy suburban home with her husband, Aaron, before she even hit 30. She was the benchmark my parents measured success against, the yardstick by which my own life was silently judged. I never kept up. My path was slower, winding. After a few false starts, I found purpose in nonprofit work, the kind of job that didn't earn much money but gave me fulfillment. My parents pretended to admire it, but I could sense the subtle disappointment, especially when compared to Stephanie's climbing salary and picture-perfect life. It bred a silent resentment that Stephanie and I both carried, though we showed it differently. She showed it by asserting authority, by treating me like the younger sister, even when we were both in our 30s. I showed it by shrinking, by apologizing too much, by swallowing my feelings until they left a bitter taste I couldn't spit out. That's why her comment in the family chat cut so deep. It wasn't just about cancer, it was about my credibility as a person. To Stephanie, I was always the one prone to drama. When I cried after breakups, she called me overly emotional. When I struggled to pay bills, she called me irresponsible. When I admitted I sometimes felt lost, she said I was too soft for the real world. In her eyes, I was weak. And now, with my health crumbling, she found a way to weaponize that perception. My family's group chat quieted after that night, but the silence was heavier than words. My mom called me privately, her voice gentle but unsure, as if she was caught between two daughters she loved but couldn't reconcile. She asked how I was feeling, if I was eating, if I was resting. I told her the truth, that I was scared. She sighed, promised she believed me, but there was a hesitation that made my stomach twist. I knew she loved me, but I also knew how much influence Stephanie carried in her eyes. If Stephanie planted seeds of doubt, my mom would wrestle with them, no matter how much she wanted to trust me. My dad, on the other hand, didn't call. He rarely did. His love was a quiet thing, more expressed in fixing my car or slipping me a gas card than in words. Still, I longed to hear his voice, some reassurance that he wasn't doubting me too. Tyler, sweet Tyler, drove over 2 days later with a bag of takeout from my favorite Thai place. He sat on my couch while I picked at the pad Thai and told me I looked pale. He asked about the tests, about how long until results. When I broke down admitting how much Stephanie's words had crushed me, he shook his head. "Rachel, she's always been like that. Don't let her get in your head. I know you. You wouldn't lie about this. Just hang on until the results come." His loyalty steadied me, but even his presence couldn't erase the gnawing fear. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Meanwhile, life didn't stop.
I still had to show up to the community center. I still had to smile at kids who came in for after-school programs, organize volunteers, respond to emails. But behind every smile was exhaustion. Behind every typed message was the weight of bone-deep fatigue. People started noticing. My boss, Gloria, pulled me aside one afternoon and said gently, "Rachel, are you okay? You've been pushing yourself hard." I wanted to tell her everything, but I couldn't bear the pity in her eyes. Instead, I said I was just tired, just adjusting. I lied to protect myself from being seen as fragile. The real battle, though, wasn't at work. It was in the silence of my family chat. Days turned to a week, then two, with nothing but surface-level messages. Shared recipes, a photo of Tyler fixing up his motorcycle, my dad sending memes he barely understood. But beneath it all was the elephant in the room. No one brought up Stephanie's accusation. No one defended me outright. And every time my phone buzzed, I wondered if another cutting message from her would appear. I thought about confronting her directly. I typed long paragraphs late at night, messages demanding to know how she could accuse me of something so cruel, how she could belittle my pain. But every time I deleted them before hitting send. Part of me feared giving her more ammunition. If I sounded emotional, she would use it as proof that I was dramatic. Another part of me feared the truth. Maybe she wouldn't back down. Maybe she would double down. And maybe my parents, already hesitant, would lean further toward believing her.
What ate at me most was the realization that cancer, or even the suspicion of it, should have brought us closer. Families rally around each other in times of crisis, right? That's what people say. But instead, my crisis was becoming a wedge. I felt isolated, more alone in the face of my sickness than I ever had before. Every ache in my body reminded me of the possibility of disease, and every silence from my family reminded me of betrayal. At night, I'd sit in bed scrolling through forums, reading posts from strangers who described similar symptoms, similar fears. Some of them shared stories of families who rallied, who drove them to appointments, who cooked meals during chemo. Others wrote about abandonment, about spouses who left and siblings who turned cold. I didn't want to see myself in the latter, but I couldn't ignore the resemblance. My sister's disbelief wasn't just painful, it was dangerous. If the results came back confirming the worst, I would need support, not suspicion. And right now, support felt like something I couldn't count on. So, I waited, caught in limbo, waiting for test results, waiting for my family to choose sides, waiting to see if my body was betraying me in ways even worse than my sister's words. Every day stretched longer, heavier, filled with both dread and a stubborn spark of hope. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. The storm brewing in my family had only just begun. The waiting was unbearable. Each day felt like I was holding my breath underwater, trying not to drown in the silence. The results were supposed to take a week, maybe two at most, but the days stretched on with no word from the hospital. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt, only to fall when it was just another automated reminder from the pharmacy or a promotional text about pizza deals. But on the 10th day, the phone rang with the hospital's number flashing on the screen, and the air seemed to leave the room. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone before I answered. The nurse's voice was professional, calm, explaining that the doctor wanted me to come in to discuss the results in person. It was the kind of phrasing they used when the news wasn't good. If it had been clear, benign, they would have said so outright. My chest tightened. I agreed to the appointment the following morning, but my voice cracked when I thanked her. The moment I hung up, the weight of it all came crashing down. This was no longer speculation. This was real. I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Stephanie's words in the family chat. She's lying. She just wants attention. That phrase haunted me, and now the reality of my situation made it sting even more.
It wasn't just that she doubted me, it was that she actively painted me as deceitful in front of the very people I needed most. And tomorrow, when I sat in that doctor's office and heard whatever diagnosis awaited, I would be carrying her accusation on my back like an added burden. My first instinct was to keep it to myself, to go to the appointment quietly, just me and the doctor. But then I thought about how this silence was giving Stephanie power. She had thrown her words into our family chat like a grenade, and I had let the shrapnel pierce me without a word of defense. I realized then that hiding would only fuel her narrative. If I went to the doctor and didn't tell anyone, she could twist it into, "See, she didn't even have an appointment." That's the way my sister worked, always ready to spin silence into guilt. So I did something I wasn't sure I had the courage to do. I opened the group chat and typed, "The hospital called. They want me to come in tomorrow to discuss my biopsy results." My finger hovered over send, my chest aching as if every breath was borrowed. Finally, I pressed it. The message sat there for minutes before anyone responded. My mother was the first, her words short but kind. "I'll pray tonight for good news." Tyler followed with a simple, "Do you want me to go with you?" My father predictably said nothing. Then Stephanie replied, her tone dripping with that familiar superiority. "She's lying. She just wants attention." My stomach churned. It wasn't just disbelief now, it was condescension. She wasn't just saying I was lying, she was implying I wanted this, that I needed it to feel important. Rage surged inside me, hot and bitter. For the first time in my life, I didn't swallow it. I typed back, "This isn't about feeling special, Stephanie. This is about my health. If you can't be supportive, then don't say anything." I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The chat silence went again. No one defended me, not even Mom. My message hung there like a shot fired into the dark, unanswered. And yet, even in the silence, I felt something shift inside me. It was the first time I had stood up to Stephanie directly, the first time I hadn't let her reduce me to the dramatic little sister. That night I lay awake rehearsing what the doctor might say, swinging between hope and despair. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. The storm brewing in my family had only just begun.
The next morning, Tyler showed up at my door, unshaven and holding 2 travel mugs of coffee. "I'm coming with you," he said, no questions asked. Gratitude swelled in my chest, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. The drive to the hospital was quiet, except for the sound of rain tapping against the windshield. I stared out the window, watching the gray sky blur into streaks of water, my mind replaying every possible outcome. In the waiting room, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. My knee bounced uncontrollably, my nerves screaming as each second passed. Tyler sat beside me, flipping through an old magazine he clearly wasn't reading. When the nurse finally called my name, my legs felt like lead. Tyler squeezed my shoulder as I stood, and that small gesture was the only thing that kept me from collapsing. Inside the doctor's office, the world slowed. He greeted me kindly, but his eyes held the heaviness of someone who carried difficult truths too often. He explained the results carefully, choosing words that balanced honesty with compassion. "The biopsy shows abnormal cell growth consistent with early-stage lymphoma," he said, his voice steady. My ears rang. The word lymphoma echoed like a bell, reverberating through my body. He went on about treatment options, about how catching it early improved the prognosis, about specialists he would refer me to, but all I could hear was that one word: cancer. Tyler reached for my hand, grounding me as the room spun. I nodded numbly, trying to absorb the flood of information. Part of me wanted to scream, part of me wanted to cry, but most of me just felt hollow, as if all the fear had drained out and left me empty. When the appointment ended, I walked out clutching a folder of pamphlets I couldn't bring myself to look at. In the parking lot, the rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with the smell of wet asphalt. I leaned against the car, staring at the folder, and finally whispered, "It's real." Tyler pulled me into a hug, and I broke down, sobs shaking my body as the truth settled into my bones. That was the breaking point, the moment everything changed. My sickness was no longer a shadow, no longer speculation. It had a name, a diagnosis.
And as much as that terrified me, it also meant Stephanie's accusation was about to collide with undeniable reality. The drive home from the hospital was quiet, except for the hum of the tires on wet pavement. Tyler didn't press me to talk, and I was grateful for that. My mind was too full, a cacophony of the doctor's words echoing over and over, tangling with my own fears and the weight of my sister's cruel accusation. Lymphoma, a word that now belonged to me, whether I wanted it or not. By the time we pulled into my driveway, the silence felt suffocating. Tyler finally said, "You're not alone in this, Rach. Don't let Steph make you feel otherwise." His words cracked something in me, a reminder that even if my sister doubted me, there were still people who saw me clearly. After Tyler left, I sat at my kitchen table with the pamphlets the doctor had given me, spread out like a deck of cards. Chemotherapy, radiation therapy, possible side effects, survivor stories. My eyes blurred as I tried to focus, but all I could think about was how to tell my family. Part of me wanted to keep it private, to share only with Tyler and Mom, maybe Dad. But the larger part of me burned with a need to prove Stephanie wrong. Her words had poisoned the family chat, and I couldn't let that poison spread unchecked any longer. I picked up my phone, opened the group chat, and typed, "The doctor confirmed today. It's lymphoma, early stage. I'll start treatment soon." My finger hovered over the send button. My heart hammered in my chest, but then I remembered Stephanie's sneer, her confidence in dismissing me as a liar. I pressed send. The responses came quickly. My mom sent a string of crying emojis and wrote, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. We'll get through this." Tyler added, "We'll fight it together. I'm with you every step." Even Dad, usually silent in these matters, typed, "Stay strong. Proud of you for facing it head on." Those words meant more than I expected, even if they were few. For a moment, I felt a flicker of warmth, but then Stephanie's reply appeared. "Seriously, Rachel, don't you think this is a little dramatic? People get abnormal cells all the time. Doctors love slapping scary labels on things. You're probably fine, and now you've got everyone worked up for nothing." My chest constricted, fury rising like fire. She couldn't even let the truth settle without undermining it. But this time, something different happened. For the first time, my parents didn't stay silent. My mom replied, "Stephanie, enough. The doctor said it's cancer. This isn't something to minimize or dismiss. Your sister needs us." My father added, "Your comment was out of line. Rachel's fighting something real." I stared at the screen in disbelief. For years, Stephanie had been the authority in the family, the voice people deferred to, even when she was harsh. But now, cracks were forming. For the first time, my parents were defending me openly against her. That small shift felt monumental.
Later that week, the first external voices began to weigh in. Gloria, my boss at the community center, called me into her office after I requested time off for treatments. I braced myself for skepticism. Maybe she would think I was exaggerating, just as Stephanie did. But instead, her eyes softened with concern. "Rachel, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked. I shrugged, trying to explain how hard it was to speak the words aloud. Gloria reached across the desk, resting her hand over mine. "You've given so much of yourself here. Now it's our turn to support you. Take the time you need. We'll cover things." That validation hit me harder than I expected. Someone outside my family, someone objective, had no reason to doubt me. And she didn't. She saw the truth without question. When I told Tyler later, he said, "See, not everyone's blind like Steph." And he was right. But Stephanie wasn't done. At a family dinner the following Sunday, she confronted me face to face. We gathered at my parents' house, a modest 2-story with a sagging porch swing and the smell of Mom's pot roast filling the air. Normally, family dinners were noisy affairs, filled with laughter, but this one was tense from the start. I sat quietly, picking at my plate, while Stephanie's eyes bored into me across the table. Finally, she said, "So what exactly did the doctor say? Because all I heard is early stage. That could mean anything. Are you sure you're not blowing this out of proportion?" The room went still. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. My mother's face flushed with anger. "Stephanie, stop it. She has cancer. This isn't up for debate."
My father slammed his hand on the table. Your sister's fighting for her life. Show some respect. But Stephanie only smirked, leaning back in her chair. I just think it's worth asking questions. Rachel has a history of exaggerating. Her words stung, but this time I wasn't alone in absorbing them. Tyler snapped, That's enough, Steph. You saw the test results she shared with us. This is real. Stop acting like she's making it up. For once, Stephanie didn't have the last word. The weight of everyone else's disapproval hung heavy in the room. She folded her arms, scowling, but stayed silent. I felt my throat tighten with unshed tears. For the first time, my family wasn't passively letting her control the narrative. They saw me, they believed me, and they defended me. It was the first crack in her wall of dominance, the first sign that truth was beginning to shine through the lies. That night, as I lay in bed replaying the dinner, I realized something important. Stephanie's grip on the family had always been strong because no one ever challenged her. But now, the doctor's diagnosis had given me a weapon she couldn't twist away: evidence. And with that evidence came allies. For the first time, I didn't feel completely powerless in the face of her cruelty. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. Stephanie wouldn't back down so easily. And as the reality of treatment loomed ahead, I understood that the fight wasn't just against cancer. It was against the toxic doubts and lies that threatened to isolate me even further. After the confrontation at my parents' house, I realized that surviving this meant more than just enduring chemotherapy and doctor's visits. It meant reclaiming my narrative. Stephanie had tried to define me, to rewrite my reality as attention-seeking and deceitful, and the only way to fight back was with evidence. Not just the doctor's word, which some might still dismiss, but a tangible trail of proof that no one, not even Stephanie, could ignore. I began documenting everything meticulously. I started with my medical records, requesting full copies of test results, lab reports, and biopsy notes. Each page I collected was like a brick in a fortress, building a structure of undeniable truth around my experience. I stored them in a folder labeled Rachel's Medical Documentation, a small but potent symbol of control in a situation that had felt overwhelmingly out of my hands. At the same time, I began keeping a journal, recording every symptom, every hospital visit, every conversation with doctors. Fatigue, bruising, night sweats, dizziness. If I ignored them, it was as though the illness could hide in the shadows. Writing them down forced reality into words, made it impossible for anyone to dismiss my experience. I documented Tyler's visits, mom's support, even the subtle reactions of my coworkers, noting who believed me and who hesitated. It was painstaking work, emotionally exhausting, but with each entry I felt a little more grounded, a little more prepared to confront the skepticism that had threatened to drown me. The hospital staff became unexpectedly important allies. My oncologist, Dr. Ainsley Harper, encouraged me to request detailed reports and even offered to write a summary explaining the biopsy results in plain language, so it would be harder for anyone to misinterpret them. She explained that patients often underestimated the power of documentation, especially when family members refused to believe them. I nodded, realizing that what she was saying applied perfectly to my situation. Stephanie's doubt wasn't just cruel, it was undermining my support network, isolating me at a time when I most needed solidarity.
I also began gathering proof in more personal ways. I saved screenshots of texts between Tyler and me discussing appointments and symptoms. I collected emails from Gloria at the community center, where she confirmed my medical absences and offered support. I even kept notes from my support group meetings, other patients who had shared stories eerily similar to mine, some of whom had faced family members who doubted them. Each piece added weight to my story, building an unassailable case that what I was experiencing was real, urgent, and true. Meanwhile, Stephanie continued her subtle undermining. She would call Mom in the evenings trying to clarify my symptoms, suggesting that perhaps I was imagining things or exaggerating fatigue for attention. I knew these calls were happening because Mom started leaving her voicemails on my phone. Sometimes Mom would tell me after the fact, her voice trembling as she tried to balance loyalty between two daughters.
But now, with my growing collection of documentation, I could respond without fear or uncertainty. I wasn't dependent on her validation anymore. The truth spoke for itself. One afternoon, I received a call from the insurance company requesting additional verification for coverage of my upcoming treatment. I realized this was an opportunity. I faxed over every piece of documentation I had gathered: lab results, doctor notes, symptom logs, and letters from both Tyler and Gloria confirming my health status and appointments. I watched as the insurance representative reviewed each page, and for the first time, I felt the power shift slightly back into my hands. Systems responded to documented truth, even if people were slow to accept it emotionally. At home, I also turned the evidence into a shield against Stephanie's ongoing interference. When she texted me one evening with a condescending, "Don't you think this is all a little overblown?" I didn't respond in anger or desperation. Instead, I wrote, "Here's my latest lab report. I'm documenting everything for my own records, so there's no misunderstanding." I attached the document and hit send. Her reply never came, and that silence, this time, felt like a victory. I wasn't trying to change her mind. I was simply proving, for myself and anyone who would later need to support me, that the truth could not be disputed. As I continued my treatment plan, I realized another key piece of evidence was time itself. Every hospital visit, every IV treatment, every appointment logged on my calendar served as a living, breathing record of reality. I took photographs of the infusion room, of the seat where I would sit for hours, of the paperwork I signed for consent. Even small things like the bruises from blood draws became part of my archive, reminders that the physical reality of my experience was undeniable. I was creating a body of proof so compelling that no doubt could survive it. Tyler became my unofficial archivist, helping me scan and organize the documents, creating a digital folder accessible only to me and a few trusted people. My journal entries became more precise, more clinical at times, as I cataloged symptoms by time of day, intensity, and duration. By the end of the month, I had amassed a detailed, airtight record of my experience. I could see the outline of my future arguments clearly forming. If Stephanie questioned me, if anyone doubted me, I would not flinch. I had the evidence. I had the truth. And with it, I had power. But even as I gathered proof, I knew the fight was far from over. Evidence could sway some people, but Stephanie thrived on emotional manipulation, on twisting perception to suit her narrative. I would need more than documents. I would need to stand strong, unshakable, and ready for confrontation. The path ahead was daunting, but for the first time since the accusation in the family chat, I felt a sense of preparedness. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was becoming a truth seeker, someone ready to reclaim her story and make sure no one, not even my sister, could deny it. The undeniable proof arrived quietly, but it struck with the force of a hurricane. I had been preparing myself for weeks to face this moment, mentally bracing for disappointment or more doubt, but nothing could have readied me for the clarity of the results the doctor called to deliver. Dr. Harper's voice, calm and measured, carried an edge of gravity as she began, "Rachel, the latest round of imaging and pathology confirms the diagnosis. There is abnormal lymphocyte proliferation consistent with early-stage lymphoma, and it's aggressive enough that treatment should begin immediately." My hands shook, gripping the phone so tightly that I thought it might crack. The words were terrifying, yes, but also liberating. Finally, there was a certainty that could no longer be questioned. Stephanie's accusations, her smirks, her comments in the family chat, they had nowhere to hide. I took a moment to breathe, letting the information sink in. The fear, the panic, the exhaustion, it all pooled into a single point of clarity. This was real. I was sick. And the truth was documented, undeniable, and irrefutable. I called Tyler immediately, needing his voice, his presence, someone to anchor me as the weight of reality settled over me. His calm, unwavering support was exactly what I needed. He said, "It's real, Rach." Simply, letting the word hang between us. I nodded silently, even though he couldn't see me, because hearing it out loud made it more real. Not only was my diagnosis confirmed, but it also meant the evidence I had been gathering, the lab reports, the doctor notes, the symptom logs, and letters from both Tyler and Gloria confirming my health status and appointments, had a power I hadn't fully recognized until now.
With this knowledge, I began taking steps to make the truth impossible to ignore. I requested official copies of my lab results and scans from the hospital, ensuring every page was stamped, signed, and dated. I compiled my symptom journal into a concise report noting every irregularity and episode of fatigue, night sweats, and unexplained bruising. Tyler helped me scan everything into a secure digital folder, backing it up multiple times so there would be no question that the files were genuine and untampered. Even Mom stepped in, organizing a folder of supportive messages from friends, coworkers, and volunteers at the community center who had witnessed my physical struggles over the past months. Each piece of documentation became a building block, constructing a fortress of proof that could withstand any attempt to discredit me. Stephanie, of course, had no idea what was coming. She continued with her casual dismissals, texting Mom little jabs about overblown tests and medical hysteria. But for every message she sent, I now had counterweight. When she wrote in the family chat that the hospital was just trying to scare me, I was ready. I responded calmly, attaching scanned reports directly from Dr. Harper and summarizing the pathology findings. This time, my words weren't defensive. They were declarative. There was no room for debate, no ambiguity, no doubt. My sister's silence after seeing the proof was immediate and telling. She didn't know how to respond because the truth couldn't be twisted, manipulated, or minimized. The power of concrete proof extended beyond the family dynamic. Gloria at the community center helped me communicate with staff and volunteers, showing them my documentation so they could adjust schedules and offer support without misunderstanding the severity of my condition. Tyler used his contacts at work to get copies of official time-off approvals in case Stephanie tried to challenge the legitimacy of my absence. The more evidence we compiled, the more I realized that truth had weight, not just moral or emotional, but practical. Systems, organizations, and people respond to documentation. And for the first time, I could feel control slowly returning to my hands. Even emotionally, the undeniable proof shifted the balance. I no longer felt like I had to plead or justify myself constantly. I could stand tall knowing that every symptom I experienced, every appointment I attended, every test result I received was real, recorded, and verifiable. Stephanie's doubts and attacks still hurt, but they no longer had the power to define reality. I could see the change in my parents' demeanor as well. Mom's worry shifted from doubt to action, researching treatment options, scheduling extra checkups, preparing meals for recovery. Dad's usually stoic support became more active. He drove me to appointments, carried my medical folders, asked questions the doctors didn't always volunteer. They were no longer walking a line between belief and skepticism. They were fully on my side, armed with the proof I had gathered. The most striking moment came when my oncologist personally called to reassure me that my documentation efforts were a model of patient advocacy. Rachel, you've not only armed yourself with the facts, you've also created an irrefutable record that ensures your family and healthcare providers are fully aligned. This is the kind of clarity we hope every patient can have, but few achieve. Hearing her praise my methodical collection of evidence filled me with unexpected pride. In the midst of fear, fatigue, and uncertainty, I had created something tangible, a shield that no one could dismantle. For the first time since Stephanie's attack in the family chat, I felt a sense of empowerment. The undeniable proof was more than just medical documentation. It was validation, it was defense, it was an assertion that my reality mattered. I could feel a subtle shift within myself, a newfound strength emerging from the ashes of betrayal. I wasn't just the accused anymore. I was the living, breathing testament to truth. And in that clarity, I found a fragile but powerful hope. This turning point didn't erase the fear of treatment, the uncertainty of the road ahead, or the emotional labor of dealing with a sister who refused to accept reality, but it created a foundation, a bedrock of certainty in a world that had previously felt uncertain. The undeniable proof had arrived, and with it came a realization I would carry forward. Truth has its own gravity, and when paired with courage and preparation, it can finally compel even the most stubborn hearts to face reality. The truth had been documented, undeniable, and carefully organized, but it remained locked inside me, like a river waiting to burst through a dam. I knew that gathering evidence was not enough. If I truly wanted to reclaim my life, to silence Stephanie's accusations and reclaim my place in the family, I would have to speak, not just to my parents, not just to Tyler, but publicly, to anyone's perception that had been swayed by her lies. It was terrifying, the thought of confronting her directly in front of the family, of exposing my vulnerability in a way that could never be retracted. But I understood, with a clarity that had come only through fear and preparation, that this was the point of no return. Silence had allowed doubt to fester, and now speaking was the only path towards liberation.
I spent days preparing, practicing in front of the mirror, rehearsing words that balanced anger with calm, pain with fact. I didn't want to explode in a flurry of accusations. That would only feed Stephanie's narrative of me being dramatic or overreacting. Instead, I focused on clarity and precision. I would present the truth as it was, anchored in the evidence I had painstakingly gathered. The lab reports, the biopsy notes, the detailed journal entries, even photos of bruising from blood draws. Each piece was a pillar of undeniable reality. The weight of it both terrified and steadied me. If I hesitated or wavered, Stephanie could still manipulate perception. But if I spoke clearly, confidently, without apology, there was no way for her to maintain her false narrative. The moment came at the next family gathering, a Sunday dinner that had been scheduled long before my diagnosis. I knew Stephanie would be there, expectant, possibly smirking, ready to assert control as she always did. Tyler had insisted on coming with me, his presence a grounding force, while my parents sat quietly across the table, nerves visible in their tense expressions. The room smelled of roasted chicken and fresh-baked bread, but beneath that comforting aroma was a charged tension, the kind that presses against your chest and makes your heart beat thunder. I waited until the conversation naturally veered toward health. Mom had casually asked about my energy levels and upcoming appointments. Then I spoke. My voice was steady, measured, carrying an authority I didn't know I had. I need to address something important. Stephanie has expressed doubt about my diagnosis, implying that I've been dishonest about my illness. That isn't true, and I want everyone here to understand exactly what's happening. I paused, letting the silence amplify the gravity of my words. Stephanie's lips twitched in the faintest smirk, as if she were already preparing a retort, but I held my ground. I began presenting the evidence, starting with the hospital documentation, scans, pathology reports, lab results. I explained my symptoms in clear, factual terms, referencing my symptom journal. I showed photographs where necessary, pointing out details that corroborated my narrative, bruising from blood draws, notes from appointments, even messages from Tyler and Gloria validating the seriousness of my condition. I could see the color draining from Stephanie's face as she scrolled through each page on my tablet, her smirk faltering with each new piece of proof. For the first time, she wasn't in control. My parents' reactions were immediate and emphatic. Mom's eyes glistened with tears of relief, her hand shaking slightly as she reached over to touch mine. "I believe you, Rachel. I always believed you," she said. My dad's voice, usually calm and stoic, had an edge of fierce protectiveness. "You've faced this with honesty and strength. That's all that matters. Stephanie's doubts are irrelevant now." Tyler squeezed my hand from the other side, silent but present, a reminder that I wasn't standing alone. Stephanie tried to interject, her words clipped, sharp, and dismissive. "I'm just asking questions. This could all be overstated." But my presentation had stripped her of leverage. I remained calm, responding with facts rather than emotion. "The evidence doesn't support your skepticism, Stephanie. Everything here comes from doctors, official records, and witnesses who have observed my condition firsthand. This isn't a matter of opinion, it's reality."
The room went silent again. Even Tyler, normally quick to jump into argument, held back, letting the facts speak for themselves. In that moment, I realized the power of speaking with authority. The fear that had made me second-guess my own reality melted into resolve. I was no longer the sister whose words could be dismissed, whose pain could be minimized. I had stepped into the truth, articulated it clearly, and presented evidence that could not be twisted. I could see the shift not only in Stephanie's expression, but in the way my parents and Tyler regarded me. Respect, belief, and the validation I had long craved. The decision to speak wasn't just about defending myself, it was about reclaiming my life. The illness itself was frightening enough, but the added burden of doubt had been a separate weight I could no longer carry. By choosing to articulate the truth, I stripped Stephanie's power, restored my family's faith in me, and, most importantly, reclaimed my own agency. I wasn't just reacting to false accusations, I was taking control of the narrative, asserting my reality, and setting the stage for healing, support, and resilience. By the end of the evening, the tension had shifted entirely. Stephanie remained in the room, silent, unable to assert dominance over the truth. My parents, Tyler, and I had aligned, united in understanding, and I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. Speaking had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been transformative. I had faced the possibility of disbelief, confrontation, and emotional backlash, and emerged not only unbroken, but empowered. The choice to speak was the point of no return, and for the first time in weeks, I felt in control of both my health and my story. This was no longer just about proving Stephanie wrong, it was about asserting my right to be believed, to be supported, and to be treated with the dignity and respect I deserved. And in that choice, I felt the first true surge of hope in a long, dark chapter of my life.
The confrontation with Stephanie came sooner than I expected, and it was inevitable. I had anticipated denial, silent resentment, or veiled digs, but nothing could have prepared me for the storm that erupted when the family gathered for a small celebration of Mom's birthday a week later. I had just returned from a follow-up appointment at the hospital, still weak from the infusion, my energy sapped but my determination unwavering. Tyler was with me, as always, carrying the extra weight of my folders and supplies, his presence a steady anchor. The dining room was filled with the familiar aroma of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie, yet beneath the surface, tension pulsed like a live wire. Stephanie's eyes fixed on me from across the table, sharp and calculating, and I felt the familiar burn of dread and defiance in equal measure. I knew she had been waiting for the perfect moment to challenge me again, and tonight, with the family all present, she had the stage she craved. Stephanie didn't waste time. She leaned back in her chair, her voice dripping with sarcasm and disdain as she said, "So, Rachel, tell us again how sick you are. I mean, it's great that the hospital confirms it, but don't you think this is all a little dramatic? You look fine, honestly. I mean, are you sure you're not exaggerating?" The words hit me like a punch, but this time I didn't flinch. I had prepared for this. I had rehearsed responses, organized evidence, and built a foundation strong enough to withstand her attacks. I sat upright, meeting her gaze directly, and calmly placed my folder on the table in front of me. "Stephanie, I understand you want to question everything, but the facts are indisputable. Here are my latest lab results, biopsy reports, and documentation from every appointment I've had. Every symptom I have experienced is recorded and verified. This is not exaggeration. This is reality." For a moment, the room was silent, every eye on me as I opened the folder and began displaying the reports, pointing out anomalies, cell counts, and radiology notes. Even the photographs I had taken of bruises from blood draws and notes from support group meetings were laid out for scrutiny. I could see Stephanie's lips tighten, the smirk that had haunted me for weeks fading under the weight of concrete evidence. She tried to speak again, but my parents, who had remained largely quiet until now, finally interjected. Mom's voice was firm and protective. "Stephanie, enough. Rachel has provided everything she needs to substantiate her condition. Your doubts are cruel and unnecessary.
It's time to stop undermining her. Dad's voice, usually calm and measured, carried a rare sharpness. You've had your chance to sow doubt, Stephanie. The evidence is here. Accept it or step aside. Stephanie's eyes flickered between defiance and disbelief, but for the first time, she had no words that could land effectively. The room seemed to close in around her, the weight of truth pressing against her false narrative. I felt a surge of quiet vindication, not because I wanted to humiliate her, but because I had spent so long being doubted, questioned, and dismissed. Now, the facts themselves spoke louder than her accusations ever could. Tyler leaned closer, whispering, "You've got this. You're untouchable with this truth." And I nodded, a calm determination settling over me like armor. As the evening progressed, the confrontation shifted from verbal attacks to tense silence. Stephanie attempted to maintain her composure, tossing occasional skeptical glances my way, but she was clearly rattled. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the narrative she had tried to control for years was slipping from her grasp. Every supportive nod from Mom, every protective glance from Dad, every reassuring squeeze from Tyler reinforced that I was no longer isolated, no longer vulnerable to her manipulations. She had lost the stage, and though she didn't concede verbally, her body language betrayed her. Tightened shoulders, pursed lips, and a retreating gaze. I recognized then that confrontation wasn't just about presenting evidence, it was about endurance. Stephanie could hurl doubt, manipulate emotion, and twist perception endlessly, but if I remained calm, organized, and factual, her attempts to destabilize me would crumble. That realization gave me strength beyond the documents themselves. It wasn't just about proving my illness was real, it was about asserting my right to be seen, heard, and believed. Each glance from my parents and Tyler reinforced that I was no longer fighting alone, that my truth had become a shared reality within the family. The evening ended without a formal apology from Stephanie, but the shift was palpable. Where once she had dominated family gatherings with cutting remarks and veiled accusations, she now sat subdued, constrained by the undeniable facts I had laid before everyone. The confrontation had stripped her of the power to define my reality, and though tension lingered, the balance had shifted. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of stability and clarity in my family, a fragile but real victory that came not from aggression, but from the deliberate, unwavering presentation of truth. By the time we cleared the table and washed the dishes, I realized something critical. This confrontation wasn't the end, but a turning point. Stephanie's manipulation had met its match, and the foundation I had built, the documented proof, the support of my family, and my own resolution was strong enough to hold even against her fiercest attempts. I had faced the antagonist directly, unflinching, and the consequences were clear. Power had shifted, truth had prevailed, and the next phase of this battle would be one I could face with confidence.
Despite the victory of presenting undeniable proof and confronting Stephanie, the darkness of reality settled in that night, heavier than ever. I had expected some relief, a sense of accomplishment, but instead I was hit with a profound exhaustion that wasn't just physical from treatment, but emotional, psychological, and suffocating. My body was weak from chemotherapy, every muscle aching, every vein tender from repeated blood draws. Fatigue draped over me like a wet blanket, yet the worst weight was the gnawing fear that, despite everything, life as I knew it was slipping away. The undeniable proof had cleared the cloud of doubt, but it hadn't erased the looming reality of cancer itself, the uncertainty of treatment, the side effects, the fear of the unknown. Lying in my bed, I felt trapped in a storm that no amount of evidence could calm. That evening, after dinner had long ended and Tyler had gone home, I sat in my room surrounded by my folders of lab reports, scans, and journals, flipping through them absent-mindedly. The documents, which had once given me a sense of power, now reminded me of how precarious my life felt. Each page bore the stark reality of my illness, a testament to vulnerability I couldn't escape.
I realized that the confrontation with Stephanie had drained me emotionally, and in its wake, an emptiness remained, a sense of isolation that even family and friends couldn't fully fill. My parents were supportive, Tyler was steadfast, but the fight against disease was mine alone, an internal battle that required courage I sometimes doubted I possessed. Sleep was impossible. Every time my eyes closed, I was haunted by visions of hospital rooms, IV needles, and the thought of my selves betraying me from the inside. Anxiety wrapped around my chest, making it hard to breathe, making it hard to remember that I had survived previous challenges. Stephanie's voice echoed in my mind, the sting of her disbelief lingering despite her defeat at dinner. She had always been able to twist reality for others, and though she had no ground to stand on this time, her shadow of doubt still lingered in my psyche, like a subtle poison I couldn't fully expel. By the third night, the emotional toll became overwhelming. I found myself crying quietly in my bathroom, staring at the reflection in the mirror, wondering how I had reached this point. It wasn't just the cancer, the pain, or the treatment that frightened me. It was the fragility of life itself. The knowledge that even with family on my side, some battles could not be softened by love or proof. I felt utterly alone, even when surrounded by people who cared deeply for me. The weight of vulnerability, of uncertainty, pressed so hard that it was nearly unbearable. In these hours of despair, I started questioning everything. The choices I had made, the words I had spoken to confront Stephanie, the decisions about treatment. Was I strong enough? Could I endure months of chemotherapy, the nausea, the hair loss, the weakened immunity? I feared not. I feared waking up one morning to a world where my body betrayed me completely, where the illness advanced despite my efforts. The folders of evidence that had been my shield now seemed like a cruel reminder. While I could prove the reality of my condition to others, I couldn't control its trajectory or the pain it brought. It wasn't only fear of disease that consumed me. The confrontation with Stephanie had created fractures in my emotional landscape. Though she had no ground to stand on, I knew she remained capable of sowing discord subtly, testing boundaries and injecting doubt into moments of weakness. Even when I wanted to focus on healing, a part of me braced for her next move, her next dig, her next attempt to undermine my sense of reality. That vigilance was exhausting, leaving no room for rest or peace. The mental load was crushing, and I realized that this fight was more than illness. It was about reclaiming a life constantly contested by doubt and malice. Late that night, I called Tyler. His voice on the line was calm, reassuring, a tether to sanity. I told him everything, my fears, my exhaustion, the creeping sense of hopelessness. He listened without judgment, providing the steady presence I desperately needed. "You're allowed to feel scared," he said softly. "This is hard. You don't have to face it perfectly. You're doing what anyone would do in this situation. You're surviving and preparing." His words grounded me, but the darkness lingered. Even comfort from those who loved me couldn't erase the internal weight pressing down. I spent the next 2 days in a fog of fatigue and worry. Appointments, medication schedules, and even simple household tasks felt monumental. Each step required effort beyond what I thought possible. I realized that this period, this dark night of the soul, was as much a part of the battle as confronting Stephanie, gathering evidence, or presenting proof. Endurance wasn't just about standing up to others. It was about surviving the silent terror, the crushing loneliness, and the uncertainty that accompanied every heartbeat. Finally, on the third morning, as sunlight filtered through my blinds, I sat at my desk and looked at the pile of documentation I had amassed. I felt raw, vulnerable, and exhausted, yet a subtle awareness began to arise. These papers, these records, this evidence, they were not just proof for others, they were proof for me. They reminded me that I had faced fear before, that I had confronted doubt and manipulation, and that I had prepared meticulously for challenges.
Even in this lowest point, the documentation was a lifeline, a tangible affirmation that I had the tools to face what was coming.
Though the darkness was still present, I felt the first spark of determination rekindling. I realized that the night of despair would pass, that fear and vulnerability could coexist with courage. My body might be weak, my emotions frayed, but the truth was still on my side. And that truth had allies, family, friends, and even my own inner resilience. And in that fragile hope, I understood that this dark night, as crushing as it was temporary, a crucible that would test not only my endurance, but my capacity to emerge stronger, ready for the next battle ahead. The moment had finally arrived, the culmination of weeks of preparation, confrontation, and quiet endurance. I found myself seated in a small, private conference room at the hospital, my folders of evidence neatly stacked on the table before me, my parents flanking either side, and Tyler standing quietly behind my chair. The room was sterile, smelling faintly of disinfectant, but it was charged with gravity. Today, the truth would not merely be spoken, it would be officially witnessed, examined, and validated by professionals, authority figures whose opinions carried weight beyond personal relationships. This was the stage where skepticism would meet undeniable evidence, where Stephanie's doubts could no longer hide behind casual smirks or passive-aggressive text messages. Dr. Harper entered first, her calm demeanor a steadying presence. She greeted us with a small smile and took her seat across the table, her eyes flicking briefly to my folders. "Rachel, we're here to review everything, ensure clarity, and make sure your medical record accurately reflects your condition," she said. It wasn't a question, it wasn't a request, it was a declaration that this meeting was official and that my truth would be formally recognized. My heart pounded in my chest as I began presenting the evidence, starting with the chronological collection of test results, lab reports, and pathology findings. Each page I handed to Dr. Harper was met with a careful, methodical examination, her eyes scanning numbers and notes with professional precision. As I spoke, I recounted the timeline of my symptoms and appointments. I explained the moments of weakness, the fatigue, the bruising, and the physical manifestations of treatment, pointing to my photographic documentation where appropriate. My voice remained steady, factual, but there was an underlying emotion I could not entirely suppress, a mixture of fear, relief, and resolve. Tyler and my parents provided support silently, their presence reinforcing my confidence. It was one thing to present evidence to a family member, another entirely to do so in the presence of a medical authority who could validate it without bias. Stephanie, of course, was absent from this formal meeting, but her influence lingered as a reminder for why this was necessary. I was not here to argue with her directly anymore. I was here to ensure that the truth was institutionalized, that my reality was acknowledged by professionals who could advocate for my care without hesitation. This was about more than vindication. It was about securing the support and understanding necessary to navigate treatment, to ensure that no doubt could interfere with my medical needs, insurance approvals, or emotional well-being. Dr. Harper asked questions, clarifying dates, dosages, and specific test results. She examined my symptom logs carefully, noting the consistency in detail, and even referenced some of the support group entries I had documented, which corroborated my reports of fatigue, nausea, and pain episodes. Each inquiry, each clarification, only reinforced the validity of my experience. There was no judgment, no skepticism, only methodical, professional verification. With every nod, I felt the invisible weight of doubt lifted, replaced by a sense of undeniable, documented reality. After an hour of review, Dr. Harper leaned back, her expression calm but firm. "Rachel, your records, your documentation, and your first-hand reports leave no room for doubt. You have clearly articulated and validated your condition, and there is nothing in these records that contradicts your symptoms or diagnosis. Any skepticism from family or outsiders is irrelevant." Her words washed over me in a wave of relief, a mixture of vindication and empowerment that I had not fully anticipated.
This was the confirmation I had needed, not for myself, but for the family, the doctors, and anyone who might later question the legitimacy of my experience. The process wasn't just formal, it was transformative. I realized in that room that the meticulous work I had put into gathering evidence, journaling symptoms, documenting every appointment, and taking photographs was not only a defense, it was a shield and a voice. It allowed me to step fully into my own reality, to assert control in a situation that had previously felt dominated by illness and doubt. By presenting the truth in a structured, verifiable manner, I had elevated my lived experience to undeniable fact, recognized by authority figures whose judgment mattered professionally and personally. The meeting concluded with Dr. Harper preparing a formal summary of my condition to be included in my medical record, a document that could not be contested or dismissed. Copies would be sent to my insurance provider, ensuring approvals of treatments and medications, and a copy would remain with my family for reference. In essence, my truth had become official, codified in a manner that left no room for manipulation. Stephanie's influence had no weight in this context. The facts spoke louder than any opinion or accusation.
As we left the room, I felt a surge of clarity and relief. The battle to prove my illness, to defend myself against doubt and disbelief, had reached its climax. I was no longer fighting in shadows or relying solely on family support. My reality had been formally acknowledged, documented, and validated. The truth had finally been put on trial, and it had prevailed. For the first time in months, I felt a profound sense of empowerment, a knowledge that no one, not even Stephanie, could erase the legitimacy of my experience. The fight was far from over, as treatment and recovery lay ahead, but the burden of disbelief had been lifted. I could now focus on healing, fully supported and fully validated. The days following the formal validation of my condition felt surreal, a mixture of relief, empowerment, and the quiet hum of new possibilities. It was as though a storm had passed, leaving the air clearer, the light sharper, and the weight on my shoulders slightly lifted. The confrontation with Stephanie, the presentation of irrefutable evidence, and the formal acknowledgement by Dr. Harper had shifted the family dynamic in profound ways. My parents were no longer anxious in a hesitant, uncertain way. They were active, engaged, and fully committed to supporting me through treatment. Tyler remained steadfast, coordinating appointments, managing logistics, and offering unwavering emotional support. Even the atmosphere in our home had changed. The tension that had once lingered like an uninvited guest was replaced with a sense of unity and purpose. Stephanie, predictably, was subdued in the weeks that followed. She avoided initiating conflict and rarely brought up my illness unless prompted. The shift in her demeanor was palpable. She could no longer assert dominance over the narrative, and the weight of undeniable proof had neutralized her influence. Though she did not apologize outright, the retreat in her behavior signaled acknowledgement, if not acceptance, of the truth. In a strange way, this quiet recognition, her inability to manipulate the story anymore, felt more satisfying than confrontation. It was a testament to the fact that the power of truth and preparation could surpass confrontation alone. I realized that victory did not require her approval or remorse. It required only that reality be acknowledged, documented, and acted upon. With the family aligned, I could now focus fully on the practical and emotional realities of my treatment. The days were structured around chemotherapy sessions, follow-up appointments, and rest periods. Tyler and my parents managed schedules and logistics, ensuring I could conserve energy while maintaining a semblance of normalcy. Meals were prepared with care, medications organized meticulously, and even small moments like reading together or taking short walks in the neighborhood became opportunities for connection and healing. In this rhythm, I discovered an unexpected strength, the ability to navigate vulnerability with agency, to endure discomfort without surrendering control, and to accept support without feeling diminished. Beyond the immediate family, I also noticed shifts in my broader social circle. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues responded with heightened empathy and support once the truth was established. Messages, calls, and visits increased, providing not only practical help, but also emotional validation. It became evident that once reality is clearly communicated and supported by proof, it enables a network of care to form that might otherwise have remained fragmented or hesitant. The documentation and confrontation I had feared were not acts of defiance, but catalysts for solidarity, allowing people to respond in ways that were genuinely constructive rather than tentative or uncertain. Even emotionally, a new equilibrium began to emerge. The fear that had previously defined my days, the fear of disbelief, of isolation, of untreated illness, gradually receded into a manageable awareness. I still felt the anxiety inherent in living with cancer, the physical discomfort, and the uncertainty of treatment outcomes, but these concerns were grounded in reality rather than compounded by doubt or manipulation. The clarity of truth allowed me to make decisions decisively, scheduling treatments, adjusting lifestyle habits, and seeking psychological support. With each decision, the sense of empowerment grew, reinforcing the idea that knowledge and preparation were as critical to survival as medical treatment itself. One particularly meaningful moment occurred when I sat with Mom and Tyler one evening, reviewing my latest test results, which showed signs of progress despite the aggressive nature of the disease. We laughed quietly over small domestic details, Tyler's clumsy attempts to cook, Mom's endless questions about my hydration schedule and sleep schedule, while the seriousness of the situation remained ever present. In that ordinary yet extraordinary moment, I realized how far we had come, from suspicion and accusation to documentation, confrontation, validation, and now active management of the disease together as a family. The equilibrium was not merely about absence of conflict, it was about presence of trust, collaboration, and mutual respect. Stephanie remained a background presence, occasionally appearing at gatherings but never regaining the influence she had once wielded. This ongoing adjustment reminded me that resolution does not always require dramatic apologies or closure from antagonists. Sometimes equilibrium is achieved simply through the alignment of truth, support, and consistent action. I felt lighter knowing that the narrative of my illness had shifted permanently. The truth had created a framework in which care and empathy could flourish, and I could finally move forward without constantly defending myself against disbelief.
By the end of the month, life began to feel more sustainable, even amidst ongoing treatment. I developed routines for self-care, psychological reflection, and community engagement, attending support group meetings and even speaking to small local groups about the importance of advocacy and documentation in health matters. Sharing my story, now validated and supported by evidence, became not only cathartic, but empowering. It reinforced the principle that courage and meticulous preparation can create systemic change, even within the microcosm of family, and that one individual's truth can inspire understanding and action in others. In this new equilibrium, I felt a profound sense of ownership over my life. The past weeks of fear, confrontation, and uncertainty had forged resilience I had not known I possessed. The validation of my illness, the alignment of my family, and the systematic acknowledgement of truth allowed me to navigate vulnerability without losing agency. I understood now that equilibrium was not passive, it was active, built through evidence, confrontation, courage, and the deliberate cultivation of support. In that understanding, I discovered a deeper sense of peace, a measured confidence that while challenges remained, they could be faced with clarity, unity, and hope. Months had passed since the confrontation with Stephanie and the formal validation of my condition, yet the echoes of that struggle remained woven into the fabric of my life, a constant reminder of the journey I had endured and the strength I had discovered. The process of treatment was ongoing, but the mental and emotional terrain had shifted profoundly. I no longer lived under the shadow of doubt, manipulated narratives, or the gnawing fear that my reality could be questioned at any moment. I had reclaimed my voice, my story, and most importantly, my agency. The transformation was subtle but undeniable, less a sudden metamorphosis and more a steady, purposeful emergence into clarity, courage, and empowerment. I had begun to structure my days with intention, balancing medical care, rest, and moments of personal fulfillment. Tyler continued to be my anchor, attending appointments, offering quiet encouragement, and handling the logistical details of daily life, allowing me to conserve energy for healing and reflection. My parents remained deeply engaged, their support informed by both love and understanding, guided now by the unassailable reality of my diagnosis. In this new rhythm, I discovered that even amidst physical weakness and ongoing treatment, it was possible to experience resilience, purpose, and joy. Each small victory, completing a physical therapy exercise, laughing over a shared joke, cooking a simple meal became a symbol of triumph, a reminder that life could continue and even flourish despite illness. The family dynamics had shifted permanently. Stephanie, though still present in certain contexts, no longer wielded the subtle manipulations that had once dominated gatherings. Her absence of overt conflict was almost imperceptible, yet the change it signified was monumental. Truth, once presented with courage and evidence, had dismantled her control. I had learned that resolution does not always require confrontation in the moment, that the careful, deliberate assertion of facts and the unwavering commitment to honesty could achieve what anger and argument often could not. It was a lesson I carried beyond the immediate family into every interaction and relationship shaped by perception, doubt, or misunderstanding. Beyond the household, I discovered a new purpose in advocacy. The months of documentation, confrontation, and verification had revealed the profound power of preparation and truth in confronting skepticism, particularly in medical contexts. I began volunteering with a local cancer support organization, sharing my experience with families and patients navigating doubt, disbelief, or complex diagnoses. I spoke about the importance of meticulous record-keeping, transparent communication, and courage in advocating for oneself, using my journey as a blueprint for others who might feel isolated or dismissed. Each story shared, each conversation had the potential to validate someone else's struggle, and in that, I found a profound sense of fulfillment. The personal transformation I had undergone was no longer solely internal. It became a tool to empower and inspire others. Even my approach to self-care had evolved, whereas previously I had approached treatment with a sense of passivity, submitting to circumstance. I now engaged actively in managing my health. Meditation, journaling, and moments of reflection became integral parts of my routine, helping me navigate emotional fluctuations and maintain focus on long-term goals. The folders of evidence that had once served as shields in confrontations now served as reminders of resilience. Each page chronicled my journey, not just as a patient defending her reality, but as an individual who had endured, advocated, and emerged stronger. These artifacts of struggle became symbols of transformation, tangible proof of courage, persistence, and self-belief. One particularly poignant moment of realization occurred when I was invited to speak at a small community event about personal advocacy in health crises. Standing in front of the audience, recounting my experience with honesty, vulnerability, and detail, I saw faces nodding with recognition, faces softened by empathy, and faces inspired to take control of their own narratives. I understood then that my story, once marred by doubt and conflict, had been transformed into a beacon of hope. The struggle with Stephanie, the painstaking collection of proof, the confrontation, and the subsequent validation, all of it coalesced into a narrative that demonstrated the transformative power of truth, courage, and persistence.
Even in quieter, private moments, I noticed the change within myself. Simple tasks, preparing a meal, walking in the park, sitting with a book, were no longer tinged with the anxiety of being questioned or dismissed. I had found an internal equilibrium, a balance between vulnerability and empowerment, uncertainty and confidence. The illness was still present, treatments ongoing,
but I faced each day with a clarity and strength previously unknown to me. I had transformed from someone defined by doubt and external disbelief into someone defined by self-assurance, agency, and purpose. As I sat on the porch one evening, the sun setting behind the trees and painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The confrontation with deception, the careful documentation, the endurance of fear and fatigue, all had been essential steps in this transformation. I felt a profound sense of peace and empowerment, a recognition that even amidst illness, adversity, and human doubt, truth and courage could carve a path toward purpose and healing. I understood that my story was not simply about vindication, it was about resilience, about the power to assert one's reality, about using personal experience to foster understanding, support, and hope in others. As I sat on the perch one evening, the sun setting behind the trees and painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, I realized that transformation was complete. I was no longer a passive participant in my life, no longer defined by illness, skepticism, or conflict. I had reclaimed my story, established my truth, and discovered within myself the resilience to face what lay ahead. The journey had left its scars, both physical and emotional, but it had also imbued me with courage, clarity, and a renewed sense of purpose. My experience was now not just a tale of survival, but a message that truth, once courageously claimed and steadfastly defended, has the power to illuminate, to heal, and to inspire others. And as the final rays of sunlight faded, I understood something deeply profound. Though illness and adversity would continue to challenge me, I had emerged transformed, empowered, and ready to live fully, with hope, purpose, and the unwavering strength of truth guiding every step. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.